the problem with that is, and again why it took so long, is like band lives tend to be sort of, they blur together. You're on the road, you're making a record, you're in a van, all that stuff. Now add to that very copious amounts of alcohol and drugs, and people's memories tend to get a little fuzzy. So fortunately for the replacements, because none of them could drive, there was always somebody who was driving and presumably more sober than them around, who you could sort of, I could fall back on as like, okay, this is a relatively clear-eyed witness to this event. But it was like a, not in all cases, and Paul and Tommy actually do have pretty good memories for certain things. You know, I would talk to Paul about something and he would tell me, oh yeah, this guy, I used to play with this kid named Kevin Patrick who ended up playing in Maserati, which was one of Prince's bands. This is very detailed stuff about this, and I saw Chris Mars at a party when I was 12, and he was playing on this guy's rims, and the guy got mad, all this stuff, and then it's like, you know, it's like 45 years ago. And then he would ask me, so was Tim before Let It Be, or was Let It Be before Tim? So I'm like, you know, so that's sometimes when you're dealing with artists, they don't, you know, and some of that I'm like, I was trying to put on, but no, some of it is just mine gets a little scrambled on some things, but, and yet has a really sharp recall for other things. I guess maybe we're all like that to a certain extent.
What do you feel, you know, not to set you up because we've had this conversation
Sort
before,
of.
but, you know, I know that you kind of were looking to maybe find out what was the story behind these guys that made this amazing mercurial band possible. I feel like, you know, when you read this book, it's like this total aha of seeing how they came from different but very similar backgrounds. And, you know, there's, if everyone has read the book, you know, there's, when people get introduced in the book, it's like inevitably like, you know, sixth in family of 12, Catholic, Northeast Minneapolis. And that everyone kind of came from, you know, and their dad was in the war and he was a terrible alcoholic. And you see all these kids coming to punk rock from really similar, you know, really alienated backgrounds looking to make something that was their own. I'm not going to be my dad. Was so much of the baggage of what people came in with. Can you talk about the shared background, the shared history, and what so many of these people coming into punk rock in Minneapolis at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I specifically with this group of guys, and I think that, again, although it was probably never articulated, was a big part of their connection. As Paul said, you know, we connected in ways that normal people didn't. And the thing he was alluding to was the fact that, look, Bob Stinson came from an absolutely horrible situation. He was rejected by his birth father. His mom moved him and his older sister in the dead of night to get away from this guy who was kind of an abusive alcoholic. And they landed in California, and she hooked up with somebody who was even worse, who basically sexually molested and abused him over a period of years and just kind of like fucked his life up. And Tommy escaped that for the most part. Meantime, Chris Mars has a older brother, who's like the kind of, you know, champion, great big older brother in the family. He becomes diagnosed with severe schizophrenia in the mid-60s when that was completely not understood. And so it sort of shaped his understanding of, one, the fear of, can this happen to me? And two, the way it sort of disrupted their family and how he was empathetic to his brother, but nobody knew how to deal with that. So you have like mental health issues, physical abuse, alcoholism. In Paul's case, it was more mild, but he sort of drew so much from his father. His father's a guy who was like, in D-Day 2, walked through the corpses in this bloody water, and his job was to pull the rings off the married men so they could send him back home. And yet his father never talked about that with anybody. In all the years, Paul never got a war story out of him. So it is this culture of repression and stoicism and all that stuff. And so I think it's inevitable that they would want to react to that. And then the other thing you have to realize is these guys were high school, you know, dropouts who didn't have any trades or skills. And at the time that Paul drops out of high school in '77, which was a pretty bold choice because he could have got his degree, but he was, I think, in a way forcing himself to commit to a life of music. The disparity between the haves and the have-nots of skilled workers and unskilled workers, and particularly in Minneapolis, was like just exploding that gap. And so it really was a very bleak time for somebody in his position, and I think it was a very bold thing to say, I'm going to make this work. And when he dropped out of high school, he spent 2 years searching. He had played in ad hoc combos and little bands in the suburbs, and not the band in the suburbs, but doing things that was kind of him trying and self-educating at the library, trying to find out what is it that makes show business, what is it that rock critics are into, and he's trying to understand, what it is I can do to sort of make a life for myself. Now, those aren't the things you'd normally associate with Paul Westerberg in terms of an ambition or self-education or all that stuff, but that was really kind of the critical period for him. So that's one thing. And then at the other side, Bob gets out of years in basically juvenile jails, group homes, rehab facilities which was a reaction to the abuse he'd suffered. They moved back to Minneapolis. He just started getting in all kinds of trouble, disappeared for 3 years in the state system, and the only thing he could do to reconnect with himself and reconnect with the world was to play guitar. And, I was lucky. I found, just on a sort of dumb luck, blind guess, I petitioned the Minnesota State Juvenile System for his record. I thought there might be a few pages about it, and he had been dead long enough that he could do that with a death certificate and a lawyer and all that stuff. And I got a 300-page file on the 3 years that he was inside, and it's both painful because it kind of recaps where his life was and leading him there, but it also talks about how he doesn't participate in the group activities because he's in his room playing guitar. And then you see the very last report is it says his ambition is to start a rock and roll band, So to see that in like a juvenile report was like a pretty amazing thing. So then he gets out, and Tommy, who was spared the worst of the abuse, but grew up in a very, again, a kind of alcoholic, uncertain, unstable environment. He's stealing Matchbox cars at Target, and then starts stealing bikes. And as he put it, they were sort of going on a bike stealing spree, him and a buddy of his. And they were so brazen that they went and stole a bunch of microphones from a church in the middle of this spree, and then he got caught. And then I think they went back to the school with like wrenches out of their pockets from the bikes they'd stolen from the school. So anyway, he's about to get sent away to a boys' home type of facility in Colorado, and the judge took mercy on him, and Bob came home at that point. And one day Tommy was messing in his room, pulled out the bass, and he said, "You're going to learn how to play that so you don't go to jail." And so, that's, for somebody who didn't really have a lot of ability to save himself, to have the foresight to save Tommy was pretty amazing. And then, boom, and Chris was a neighbor of Bob's girlfriend, and it's like, boom, 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 all these things come together, and then Paul comes together, and then, those kinds of stories, they're common, but not common to the extreme that these guys had it, and the desperation that they had, so.
You can tell it fueled a lot. Should we go to questions? How long have we been talking? An hour? 4 minutes?
Yeah, I don't know. One thing that's funny about watching Chicago obviously figured very prominently in the Replacement story, and they started really coming under the aegis of Husker Du, who they were sort of friends and rivals, but friendly rivals with, and like Kids Don't Follow was a song that was written or debuted here, written on the way here, debuted here. And, in researching this, you find out really weird things. That's, that leads off what is considered the Replacement's hardcore record. And in doing this research, I found the original lyrics. And there's always that part in the beginning where it's like, kids don't want that, kids don't do that, kids don't, no, big him. And I was like, what is he saying? So I asked Paul, and he says, oh, kids don't NRBQ. So he was making a reference to NRBQ in a hardcore song. Surely that's a first. And of course, the footage you just saw was at their final show. They got material issue in NRBQ because they loved NRBQ to open up for them. And as he put it, when Paul got married, the Young Fresh Fellows played his wedding, and he said, "Well, I couldn't afford NRBQ." So, so there's little things like that. And one more story, and then we can go to questions. I've told this a couple of other places, but it's one of my favorite stories is we just heard them do Left of the Dial, which is really kind of, it's become just a synonymous with alternative radio and the indie rock movement in that whole era. And it was really written about a woman named Lynn Blakey, who some of you know. She played in Let's Active, she played in Michael Stipe's sister's band. And Paul and her had kind of this, sort of never consummated long-distance romance. They met at a show in San Francisco and then saw each other in L.A. I mean, the lyrics are literally about their whole thing. And then she moved to Georgia, Sweet Georgia Breaches. It's all in there. But, this song has become so synonymous with college radio. And it was an ode to the people at college radio whose couches they probably slept on. But Lynn, when she heard this song, I think Paul played it for her, or they did it live. He said, this is for you. And Left of the Dial, it's so beautiful. It's a secret love song, as I think my reader colleague Bill Wyman once put it. And she heard it. She's like, left to the dial. She's like, what does that mean? What are you saying? She was a college DJ, but on a station in North Carolina that was at 102.3 on the dial. So she didn't understand the concept that most of these were like on the left side of the dial. So it's like, here's like the most famous, college rock song written about you, and the subject of it was just completely flummoxed by it. So there's a lot of like things, little nuggets like that in the book that sort of pleased me to find out. So yeah, we don't want to keep you guys too long. A couple things. We'll do some Q&A if anybody has questions. So start thinking. There's books out there for sale, and there's also the good folks at Reckless are here with some replacements vinyl and their recent box set. And there's also, I think, some swag from Rhino Records. So guys, gather around there and do all that stuff. That's the commercial. So does anybody have any questions? You, sir.